Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean Appleby, for having me here and for that generous introduction. Thank you, Vice President Bernhardt, for hosting us today and potentially for taking my son and I to the game tomorrow. I have to say, and I also want to thank Tim Romer. I don't think Tim is here, but he's a good friend and a great advocate of the school, and the fact that you have launched this School of Global Affairs is very, very impressive. I have to say that it is with some hesitation that I come here to say nice things about Notre Dame. That has not been my personal experience as a kid who was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and bleeds blue. But nevertheless, I think even I have to recognize that you chose to create one new school on your campus in 100 years. And you chose to make it the Keough School of Global Affairs. And in the mission of what you've put forth, and in explaining the decision to do so, your president, Reverend Jenkins, talked about the importance of approaching global issues not only through the lens of politics and economics and trade, but also religion, health, science, agriculture, and governance. And it's really out of respect for that vision that I am here to tell you that I think you're onto something. I think you know that, and I think that you can blaze a trail forward and help students, entrepreneurs, young faculty, seasoned, tenured faculty come together and help tackle some of the most challenging global problems we face, using the science and technology, innovation and aspiration that emanates from Notre Dame and from college campuses across this country. And I think we all got a chance to see that in action when you this summer hosted 25 Mandela Fellows from 17 countries in Africa as part of President Obama's Young Africa's Leadership Initiative. I thank you for taking on that responsibility and opportunity, and can tell you, having met with now hundreds of these young entrepreneurial leaders in Africa and many other parts of the world, I'm convinced that despite reading headlines that can sometimes scare away the best of us, that the future is very, very bright, even for what we currently think of as relatively poorer parts of our world. And in building the bridges you've committed to building through that program and through the new efforts that we're engaging on with you to expand our research and innovation fellowships to provide 12 world-class students an opportunity to go the other way, serve abroad, and tackle global development challenges, that you are embodying the spirit that I think very much represents the passion and commitment to the institution at Notre Dame, and the commitment we see in young people around this country who understand and feel every moment they're on their smartphone, connected to, powerful about, and responsible for the way our world comes together. So thank you for having me here, and thank you for your leadership. I've had a chance to recently visit West Africa and to help shepherd part of the international response to tackle the crisis of Ebola in that context. And you see in this photo a healthcare worker. In fact, today we are training hundreds of healthcare workers a week on how to use protective equipment safely so that they can help lead a response and rid their countries of Ebola. We know in our context that tackling Ebola at its source will help us be safer and more secure at home. And that's a reason to do it. But we also know in this context that America is the country that steps up when crises hit, and whether or not it's a virus that's coming on an airplane to our country, or an earthquake in Haiti that devastates an economy and a society just a stone's throw from our own border, or a typhoon in the Philippines that is far away in practice but much closer in reality. It has for 60 years, on a bipartisan basis, always been the United States of America that steps up to the task. And the reason I like that video so much that you saw is the only people speaking in the video are presidents of both parties speaking while they are in office, because I think they have a depth of awareness in the presidency of what it means to be an exceptional nation. And it's in that context I want to read to you a passage from a speech President Obama delivered yesterday, standing with healthcare workers who had just come back from West Africa. Many had been parts of our programs. And he was making the point that, far from putting these folks in tents and quarantines, that we should be celebrating their leadership and their courage. And here's what he said. A lot of people talk about American exceptionalism. I'm a firm believer in American exceptionalism. You know why I am? It's because we don't run and hide when there's a problem. Because we don't react to our fears, but instead we respond with common sense, skill, and courage. So I put those on notice who think that we should hide from these problems. That's not who we are. That's not who I am. That's not who these folks are, speaking there about returning healthcare workers. This is America. We do things differently. And I want us to reflect on that for just a moment, because I think what you've taken on with the school and with the commitment to global development as part of the school is an embodiment of that basic point. I think what you've taken on is a commitment to say, show me the toughest problems, and we will bring the best of our science, our academics, our student commitment, our resources, our private sector partnerships. I met colleagues from Caterpillar and IBM here. I know you're working with them. And we'll go out and try to get it done. And it's that spirit that, in my view, has really made the transformation of the agency I have the honor of leading so significant. 30, 40 years ago, if we wanted to get something done and you ran USAID or the World Bank or a counterpart agency in another country, you want to build a road, you go out, you hire a contractor, you build a road. Today, the resources we represent relative to private investment flows, local sources of wealth, local sources of potential wealth in natural resources and human potential are minuscule relative to the huge volume of energy and activity in the private economy. And so we said we're going to pursue a new model of development that has us doing things differently. Instead of doing things ourselves, we're going to be a platform that brings together partners, companies that have skills to provide, universities that have talent and capacity and commitment, students that just have, confidence that you can do anything, and political leaders on both sides of the aisle who need to be engaged and supportive so we can be successful. And in that context, in the last 4 years, we've had a significant increase in our budget. We've had the opportunity, with bipartisan congressional support, the opportunity to rebuild our staffing by almost 30% growth in our staff around the world. We've engaged new partners on a range of topics and leveraged billions and billions of dollars of private finance to achieve some of the goals that we've set forth. And I think most importantly, the data is showing that this model is actually delivering highly leveraged and very valuable results. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. One is, I think one of those folks might be me in there. Maybe that one. No, probably that one. But anyway, we were in Sierra Leone and we were trying on the protective gear as part of a training effort we were supporting to help healthcare workers get trained so they can go out and be part of the response. And the reality is, if you're in West Africa in a tropical setting fighting Ebola at its source, you put this kind of equipment on, you go into a setting where they're sick patients and you provide care, support, isolation in an effort to save lives and prevent the disease from spreading. The number one risk of getting infection yourself comes when you take that clothing off, the protective gear off. So we launched an effort we call Fighting Ebola, a grand challenge for development. It's one of now 7 grand challenges we've pursued to improve the design of personal protective equipment. And we had the manufacturers from DuPont and Kimberly-Clark. We had scientists from universities. We had doctors from MSF and Doctors Without Borders and others all join us in a maker's lab in Virginia, where they were using a 3D printer to come up with improved zipper handles, so you're not fumbling around when you're trying to get out of these outfits. They came up with internal tabs that you can put inside and color code them, so when you're taking the clothing off, you're careful to touch sterile parts of the protective equipment. They're designing new ways to keep you cooler in the clothing so that you don't overheat and get clumsy when you're tired and hot. In fact, that alone could reduce the volume of protective equipment required by 70% if we can come up with a workable solution for the context in which we're working. And it was special for me because a woman from Motorola who was helping create a body sensor that would identify if you were kind of getting too hot and persistently inside the suit staying too hot. She said, you know, there's no other institution in the world that could have brought together West African doctors with US scientists and universities, with the manufacturers that make this equipment, and then with the scale and the capacity to buy hundreds of thousands of protective equipment so whatever ideas we come up with can actually hit the ground and make a difference in a short amount of time. And that, to me, is the power of this new model of working in practice. It's bringing folks together and saying, this is a problem worth solving. Let's do this together and do it quickly. And, you know, I think given that, President Obama has now twice stood before the joint session of Congress in the State of the Union and called on the United States to remember our commitment around the world to help end extreme poverty. And he's noted that we can now, for the first time in our history, imagine a world without the reality of people living on $1.25 a day. There's still 1.1 billion people that live on $1.25 a day. And we talk about that number as if it's, you know, a half a cup of coffee. But what it really is it means a young girl spends her day collecting firewood, using lavatories outdoors, being exposed to huge amounts of sexual violence risk, and not getting a chance to go to school. What it means is a young boy spends his time working in the fields, making products, and not building a brighter future for himself. What it means, and I visited this just 3 weeks ago, it means a community in rural Sierra Leone, if a family's going to have 3 kids, is going to have an almost 35% chance one of those 3 children die before the age of 5 of malaria, diarrhea, or pneumonia. Things we can resolve for pennies per dose for a vaccine or a drug or a diagnostic technology. So the idea that we can end extreme poverty in 15 years, which has now been proven in any number of ways, is one that I think can help galvanize, inspire your student body, your partners, and help people commit themselves to a real and meaningful goal that will also be a way that especially young people can get committed to science, to technology, to higher education, because they see the application of their engineering work, for example, as solving the Ebola crisis, or they see the application of their medical science work as creating an iPhone-based diagnostic app that can look at a blood smear and diagnose malaria with 95% sensitivity, which a group of kids at Berkeley actually invented, and we are testing and rolling out in Malawi and Nepal. So I am excited about what this new model can do. And I do want to share, and we launched the Global Development Lab to help create an institution that would bring together universities, companies, NGOs, international partners, and create platforms for creativity and engagement. One of the things we did with the lab is focused on saying it's not enough to just create new solutions. We need to take them to dramatic scale fast in order to be successful. And this is maybe a little less fun to look at, but it's probably the most important slide, because it basically shows you when we launch a pharmaceutical product in the United States, it takes 4 or 5 years, but they get basically full coverage of how they define their target market because they invest in marketing and systems to get that out there. When we do that in the world of global health or global development, despite the fact that achieving that rapid scale-up saves millions and millions of lives and transforms whole societies, we generally take 20 to 28 years and then maybe get 50% of market share. So in creating the lab, we said, well, it's not just enough to invest in new technologies, and our science and R&D budgets are up a factor of 4, from $200 million a year to almost $800 million a year. But we said we need to get really, really good at figuring out how do you get those things to scale so they have impact. And this product, Chlorhexidine, is a cheap ointment that is now we're manufacturing in Africa and Nepal and elsewhere. And you rub it on the infant's cord when the cord is cut when they're born. And it prevents infection risk, reduces death rates from neonatal sepsis. And in a nationwide study in Nepal, we saw an immediate 23% reduction in neonatal mortality from this application. Pennies per dose. Costs more to package than it does to make. So we said, let's get this out there. Today, when I meet with heads of state, I actually take with me a vial of Chlorhexidine. And I show them on my iPhone an app we developed that has their under 5 child mortality rate, their neonatal mortality rates, and compares them to their neighbors. So I say, look at this. You can do better. And all you gotta do is get this to your folks. And what I've learned, just people want to be cynical about political leaders, but I gotta tell you, I've learned to a person, whether they're in Pakistan or Tanzania, Senegal or India, they sort of sit upright and say, how can we do this? How can I deliver that result? Can you help me get it done? So, without going into a lot of detail, I just want to note that I think this basic construct of a development lab that stitches together unique capabilities to create new solutions tied to a capacity to actually get them out there is going to be a huge part of the story for ending extreme poverty. And we do have some examples that have started to succeed at scale. The one I will highlight is Feed the Future. When President Obama took office in 2008, 2009, the world was going through a food, fuel, and financial price crisis. And folks know about the financial crisis. Fewer know about the food crisis. But for the first time in 3 decades, almost 100 million people had been pushed back into a subsistence hunger after having been above that line, because food prices spiked, food became less available, and in countries where people spend 70 or 80% of every dollar feeding themselves and their families, doubling or tripling of food prices means kids don't eat or moms don't eat. Usually it's moms, but in this case it was both. So President Obama in his first G20 said, yes, we're going to tackle the financial crisis, but we also got to do something about this issue. We pulled together 20 international partners, raised $22 billion, launched a major effort, brought in, 2 years later, he said, let's update this, and at Camp David, we invited in companies. Today we work with 72 companies as part of the new Alliance for Food Security. They've made more than $10 billion of private sector investment commitments. More than a billion have already been realized in the 19 countries in which we focus this effort. And the results, because we measure them and know this with real data, are striking. 7 million farmers have improved their yields and moved their children and families out of poverty because of the Feed the Future program. That means 12 million children in those households who previously went hungry, today have sufficient food and nutrition to go to school, to learn, and to grow. And what it means, in my view, most importantly, is that entire economies defined by sort of agrarian, rural poverty are starting to move out of poverty. Tanzania, growing at 8 or 9%, creating jobs, creating opportunities for migration and trade and product diversification in their economy. And that path is in fact the pathway towards both ending extreme poverty and creating a world that is more connected and more stable. And it's in fact that path that highlights the value of applying our moral mission, applying American exceptionalism to the farthest corners of the globe. So let me just again thank you for being such great representatives of this concept. Thank you for having the courage to make this the subject of the first new school you've created in 100 years. And thank you for your commitment to ensuring that America continues to demonstrate this kind of leadership, whether it's in the context of fighting Ebola, the context of fighting food and hunger, context of saving children's lives, or the context of rebuilding fragile states after they've suffered conflict. Because in the long term, I think we all know that that's both the right thing to do, but it's also entirely about the world we want to build together, and the fact that our kids are going to feel connected to that one world on their phone, and that we have the opportunity to shape it right now. Thank you. Okay, I got to run, but we can take 1 or 2 questions. Is that okay, Shara? Yeah? Okay, all right. Maybe we'll take 2 and I'll just answer them together if you guys have comments or questions or things you want us to be aware of. Please. Hi.
Hi, Administrator. Nice to see you. Thank you for a very inspiring speech for this wonderful group. The Higher Education Solutions Network is an obvious place for collaboration to take place at the university. Do you foresee the possibility of a second tranche of Higher Education Solutions Network?
Good. I will come to that. Let me take 1 more and I'll address them together. Anything else? No? Okay. Well, it's a great question. And we created the Higher Education Solutions Network as part of the lab to create a network of academic institutions that would, frankly, help us tackle these very challenging problems. And I think we were blown away by the interest in the United States of institutions that wanted to be a part of it. We had set up teams and capacities to review sort of 40 or 50 proposals, and we got more than 400. And we were proud to announce a series of partners through this effort. Yes, we will have subsequent rounds every, I think, 2 or 3 years to help build out, intensify, and expand on the network. We also have a lot to do to kind of make sure that members of the network really feel connected to our work and our platforms. We expend about $22 billion a year in 70 countries around the world with missions in all of those places. And one of the things we wanted to do, like we've done with the AAAS Fellowship and the Jefferson Fellows and other things, is bring great talent into this system so we can learn and get better, and so that those students that choose to do that, or junior faculty that choose to do that, can go back and have a career where they're connected to our institution and to others pursuing this work. So we absolutely will stay committed to that. Okay, thank you very much for the chance to be with you, and good luck this weekend.